Bam! Jayson Waller here, true underdog. Super excited to have a guest here on our podcast. I'm excited to introduce Kara Goldin. Kara is the founder of Hint Inc., a company dedicated to facilitating a healthy lifestyle. She was also originally extremely successful in the tech industry as a VP of electronic commerce at AOL. She ended up leaving the tech world and noticed a dip in her health. Doctors labeled this as hormonal. She decided to make a change and saw incredible results without the need for medication. Her health journey inspired her to create Hint to make it easier for people to be healthy. Starting with water, she faced many obstacles entering a new industry, but preserved. Now, Hint has over 150 million in sales and is sold in all 50 states. Kara is also the author of Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, and the podcast of Unstoppable with Kara Goldin, and she's a keynote speaker. How are you doing, Kara?
I'm great. How you doing?
Good. You've got a lot of meat and potatoes here of a lot of great things you've done. So usually in the introductions, I get one or two liners. I wanted to go deep with yours because you've done a lot of cool things here, right? So I want to kind of get
Thank
started
you.
and jump in. And thanks for being on the show. So I know you grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. We talked a little bit before that. And you were the youngest of 5 kids. I've got 4 kids here, and it's chaos. It's like a circus every day. So I'm sure growing up, with 4 other siblings and being 5 is tough. But when you were younger, what really made you think that you would be an entrepreneur, want to do bigger and greater things than what you originally thought you would do as a child? What inspired you as a child?
I was always like, I feel like, just being the last of 5, we almost had like 2 sets of families. I had a brother and sister that were like 15 years older, and then my parents decided to start having kids again. And so, but they were older, or I should say older for that age. Like my mom was 40 when she had me, which people didn't do that in the that era. And so, I think also because my brothers were pretty wild and kind of naughty, my parents would always say, like, just don't do anything that's going to embarrass us or get in too much trouble. And so I was always like pretty independent and always trying to figure stuff out and kind of entertain myself along the way. And, it's funny because I never really viewed myself as an entrepreneur. I just was never afraid to go in, like, ultimately work for entrepreneurs, because I just was like energized by their craziness a little bit. So after when I left Arizona and moved to New York, I worked for a very traditional company, and then I ended up working at CNN back in the early days. And then
Was CNN, let me jump in. Was CNN the same as it is today, or is it different?
Well, Ted Turner was still like running around the place. I mean,
I
it was
remember it
crazy.
being a little different back
Yeah.
then. There was no big competition. Sorry, go ahead. I remember watching CNN. It was
Yeah,
the
no.
only news back then, really.
Well, it was 24 hours
Yeah.
too. It was the only thing that was like, and it sounds, it's a given now for so many different news networks, but for that one in particular, it was like the only thing that was 24 hours. But anyway, I was like always attracted to, like, I sort of saw the difference between a very traditional thing and then kind of a wilder thing at CNN, and then ended up moving to Silicon Valley. And that's when, saw even wilder and kind of big idea sort of stuff. But when I look back on like stuff that I did in Arizona, like starting a camp when I was like 14 years old, like in the middle of summer, like
Wow.
my brothers were like, wait, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start this camp, and we're going to make a city. And he's like, what kind of city? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to go to Safeway and get these like, paper towel boxes and put them
Safeway. I
together.
haven't
And we're
heard
going
Safeway in a hot minute. Safeway.
to charge like $5 for the day. And
Yeah.
I got my friend Robin, like we put up a sign, like we had to have a break during the day to sort of reset people. And we went and did like fished for crawdads in the canals that like went along in Arizona. And so, things like that, like, again, I didn't even think that that was being an entrepreneur. I was just like trying to create my own fun. And I also like look back on that as sort of the early days of like selling my story and like getting people to join me. And like, I knew that I wasn't going to do my camp by myself. So I would go and like, recruit people. I'd be like, come on, it'll be really fun. I'll split it 50-50. And, I was like always just making this stuff up. And then 2 weeks later, I'd get so bored that I'd be like, okay, let's not do camp anymore. Let's go do something else. And, but yeah, I mean, I think that there were so many pieces of it. To another thing that I talk about in my book is my dad. That my dad and my oldest brother Kevin. My dad actually worked for a big company, ConAgra.
Hmm.
But he founded this brand actually inside of Armor Food Company initially, and then it got bought by ConAgra, called Healthy Choice. And so I grew up in this like house where my dad was like always creating,
Hmm.
but he wasn't a traditional entrepreneur. He was like creating a brand inside of a large company. And I was like, why don't you like leave and do that on your own? Because you would like make a lot more money if you did that. And he was like, no, like you're not supposed to do that. And remember, it was a different time. Like, when my dad started working, it was like, you took one job for your whole life. There was like security,
It's
right? There was
funny you say
pension,
that. My
right?
dad worked and
Yeah.
retired at AT&T and T and had an opportunity with a friend to open up a sub shop or a video store when video stores were cool, and didn't because of the fear or the loyalty of this is who I'm going to retire with. Yeah,
Totally.
and the benefits and how that time is. Go ahead. You're right. That's how that was.
Yeah. And it was how it was. And so I think being a kid, like living in that house of like, really seeing this loyalty, seeing this like, you know, this is what I need to do. Otherwise, like I'll have like a mark against me,
Hmm.
right? For leaving. And then, and again, they all had pensions.
Yeah.
So it was a totally different story than what exists today. And so, I think there were so many aspects like that. Oh, and then my brother had he's 15 years older than me, and so I remember sitting in my garage. He would buy old Volkswagens and he would fix them up, and
That's
I
cool.
I loved sitting in the garage with him because he had great music, like all these 8 tracks, right? Like it wasn't even cassettes, and I'd be like, oh my god, it's so cool. Like he'd have great music going, and then he would just be talking out to himself and talking about like, okay, never buy a Volkswagen that's automatic. Like, and here's why. Because I was the only one in the room, and I'm like, oh, really? Like, isn't it easier to drive? No, 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 don't do this. And then he'd talk about like the margins and the business and stuff like that. And then he'd flip the cars and he'd tell me, okay, I made $800 off of that one. And I'd be like, good job. He's like, do a certain color, don't do like he had all the stuff figured out, but I was just a sponge,
Yeah.
right? Like watching all of the stuff. And so I think about that a lot. Like, it's funny because it's the one thing, when I was writing this book, you and I were talking before about like I sort of wrote it in an untraditional way. I never knew I was going to be an author.
Mhm.
I just started journaling and then ultimately ended up publishing what like half of what I journaled, just because I felt like so many of my stories would actually help people, to kind of understand the journey, that it's not all like, you know, roses, right?
Right.
But it's also like can be really rewarding, and you should like learn from your mistakes and all of these kind of all of these stories that sort of evoke lessons.
Hmm.
But what the book doesn't have is like 1, 2, 3, which is like a style that some people like write to. I personally don't like books that say, go do this 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
because I'm like, well, it just depends, and then you feel like, well, it's a little different. I can't listen anymore because they don't really get it. And so, anyway, it was, the book has like thankfully gotten like great reviews, but there was one reviewer that went in there and said she did not do like 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, I hate books that are 1, 2, 3. Like they're like every entrepreneur I know, like, how did you build your business? Like, you can't say it was 1, 2, 3. You're like, well, I did
It's like
this,
1
this
through
worked.
95, not 1 through 3, but yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Every
yeah, yeah.
industry, like I say, like it's just, and it was funny because this critic who's an, writer was like, they had never been an entrepreneur. I'm like, there's no entrepreneur that can actually tell you this is exactly what you do. Like in my case, to get your product into Whole Foods. This is like, It's like, it depends. It depends a lot on like who the buyer is,
What
and you just getting lucky,
You're
right?
right. What inspired you? I mean, you were in the tech world, you were at AOL, you got discouraged with your health, and you decided that you wanted to change the lifestyle and do what inspired you? And I love hint water, and I'm not just saying that because you're on here. We love it. We bought it. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this is cool to get Kara on here. And she founded and is the CEO of this company. That's exciting. But what inspired you to do that? And how was that transition? Because one thing you touched on that, yeah, I want the listeners and viewers to know is you're right. Every entrepreneur is different. If you make AirPods or if you make, healthy version of water or you make vitamins or you make cell phones or you make solar, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a service or a product, there's a different journey. There's a different map. There's different steps. So you're right. In a book, you can't go 1 through 10 on that experience. But what
No.
was your transition like? You're working in the tech world. You're at AOL, which is a big, promising company at the time. I don't know if they're really big now, but then you transitioned over to do this on your own. What inspired you to do that and why? And what was that process like?
Yeah, so when I was at AOL, it was, I don't know, I was employee 100 something. I was there really early and, I was commuting. I was living in San Francisco and I was commuting to Virginia and New York where our offices were. And like the United Airlines pilots all knew my name. Somewhere along the way, I had 3 kids. I have 4 kids now as well. And I just was like, I think it's time to sort of like get off the train,
Mhm.
get off the plane, literally, because I had built this business that was $1 billion in revenue to AOL. I was like managing 200 people, from San Francisco. Nobody else lived in San Francisco. And finally, I just felt like, do I wait until it's 2 billion? And like, I was getting all these calls from different tech firms saying, oh, you should come. And I was like, I felt like I had been like labeled as this tech executive.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. But it'd be like somebody saying, like, if you ever sold your company, people would be like, oh, you should go and start this like new solar company. I'm like, is that what I am? Like, am I all about solar or like, why would I do that again?
Right.
Do you know what like, it was just like,
You
I
already
don't
saw
know. I
that
just
movie. You
felt
don't want to do it again.
I did.
Right.
And I would explain this to people and they're like, well, you're really good at it. And I'm like, true. Okay, maybe. Like, and so I was having all these conversations with different tech companies, but it wasn't doing it for me. And I
Mhm.
thought if I had like a couple more gigs in me, where do I go learn? Where do I go challenge myself? I didn't think the Mecca was like managing lots of people. Like here I was the youngest vice president at AOL. I was, one of the only female vice presidents. And I don't know, like I just was like, it was hard to articulate because I thought like, I'm grateful. I'm like, all of these things, but I don't know. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I decided to, really be a mom and come back to San Francisco. That was another thing people said like, "Oh, well, don't take off too long cuz then you won't be marketable."
Mhm.
And I was like, "So how long?" And nobody could like answer that question too. Like I was just like, "Okay, I'll see what happens along the way." And that's when I decided to really look at my own health. Like I remember one day like trying to figure out like what kind of oil I should have in my car. And I cared so much about this. And then I had been like paying attention to the food I was putting in me, but I never really paid attention to the drinks. And then one day, this can of Diet Coke was like sitting perfectly in front of me where I could see the ingredients. And that's when I saw there's like 30 ingredients that I did not understand.
Mhm.
And I thought, huh, so interesting. Like, I care about my oil that goes in my car. I have so much trust in this word diet. And that's when I thought, I'm going to see what happens. And I remember my husband, I said, I'm going to not drink Diet Coke for like 2.5 weeks. He's like, you've been drinking Diet Coke for a long time. Like that might not be so easy. And I'm like, I got this. And then 2 days in, I'm like, I need a Diet Coke. And then I'm like, nope, I'm not going to do it because if I do it once, then it's like, the crack is starting
That's
to
right.
fill. Like I'm like, not going to do it. And it was hard. And then after like a week and a half, I'm like, okay, I got this now. And then I realized I was like losing weight. I had developed terrible adult acne, which I didn't even have as a
Mhm.
teenager. And my energy levels were low too. And that's when like it was just like this, like, I don't know, I just like woke up after like 2 weeks. It was like this fog that I didn't even know was like hitting me. And then I lost 24 pounds in 2.5
Oh
weeks.
wow.
And which was crazy. And my skin cleared up and all these things. So then I really started like thinking about these labels and how, and again, like I'm a tech or media executive. I'm not a nutritionist. I've never worked for a beverage company. And I'm thinking, God, so many people are like, they have so much faith in these like labels, like low fat, and there's all these diets out there, and there's like Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi and like vitamin water, and people like actually think that that's all healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was seeing was that I actually switched to drinking water and got myself healthier. I'm like, why don't more people know this? Like, it's really not that tough.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized like the addiction to sweet that we have in this country. And I mean, I really think that if you like threw a, salt, like a bag of chips and a cookie on the table, like everyone picks one,
Yeah.
right? You're either a salty person or savory, or you're like a sweet person. I'm a sweet person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that for me was like kind of figuring out, how do I get the sweet stuff under control?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I can't have it. It just means that it's like I gotta like pay attention. And so I was thinking, like 6 months went by. I ultimately lost over 50 pounds
Wow.
in the course of this year. I mean, it was crazy, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I had gained just a bunch of weight over the course of all my pregnancies. And that's when I started slicing up fruit that was on my counter, and I threw it in the water. And I'm like, this is all I need to drink water. And I went to my local store, and this brand new fancy store had just opened in San Francisco called Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. Like everything looks great there. It's all healthy. And I'm like, no, like I don't want to fall into this trap. Like I was like, there's like, you can get really, really like you can, I mean, you can eat really unhealthy at Whole Foods too. I love Whole Foods, but it's like you got to pay attention
Yeah.
to what you're doing there. And so this was this like epiphany that I had. And like just for kicks, I thought, I started talking to this guy in the beverage aisle. I was like, "Do you have any water with just fruit in it?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, there's this product called vitamin water. You're gonna love it." And I looked at the label and I was like, "Dude, you know that this has like more calories in it than a can of Coke." There wasn't even a diet version of vitamin water there. He was like, "Oh my God, you're kidding. I've gained like 10 pounds since I started
Oh my
drinking
God.
vitamin water." We're like joking around in the aisle. But I was like, I know, like my issue was like diet soda. So I felt like I was actually educating people. And like and then I came back to the store. He was like, "You're so right." Like I gave up the vitamin water, and then all of a sudden I like got healthier. And so that's when I really thought, like, while I'm figuring out my next move, probably in tech, can I actually get a product on the shelf at Whole Foods? And that's what I did. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is like, it sounds good. Like you have this idea like, oh, get it on the shelf at Whole Foods. And it ends up that there's like over 2,000 beverages in the country today. It's like the most competitive
Mm.
industry. I had tons of doubts about like once I actually got it on the shelf. And crazy story of me actually getting the first bottle on the shelf at Whole Foods on the way to the hospital to deliver my fourth child in a planned C-section, and didn't even know whether or not it was actually going to. Whether he was actually going to put it on the shelf or not. And we sold 10 cases in Whole Foods overnight. And we thought, oh, we're off to the races. And little did I know, how competitive this was. And not only against like the beverage companies, but also Big Sugar. And they don't want you there.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want you. And how health and so many of these like industries that are out there, in addition to sort of like the big soda companies, were again, I was a consumer. I never really got it, but I kept looking at like how, again, like the consumer, that the odds are so stacked against
Mm-hmm.
this consumer to actually get healthy in a time when, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about like type 2
Mm-hmm.
diabetes. I mean, all of things that, and again, it's like it's something that I just had never paid attention to. And I thought like, this is really sad. And I thought just by launching a water that tasted better, that I could convert a lot of people over without lecturing
Mm-hmm.
them, like without prescribing them, and actually change health in the world. ultimately if I did it right. But that's a big idea.
Right.
Like it's an idea that, people were like, good luck. Like a lot of people were saying good luck, and she doesn't have any beverage experience. Yes, she was
Did some of
successful in
that
tech.
motivate you? Like, I love being told I can't do it,
Totally.
or good luck. So as an entrepreneur, and you following your why or your vision to ultimately change the world, but you're like, hey, if I can get this on the shelf, I could start here in this community, and then I could start maybe in the state. I mean, you got to take the steps to get there. But in your mind, what did that make you? What kind of fuel does that give you? And they're like, good luck with that, and they just doubt you. What does that do for you?
Well, I think, to some extent it is fuel,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're living in it, and, I'm sure you had moments being an entrepreneur where, like, I'm not gonna lie, it's lonely
Mm-hmm.
at times, right? Like, you have an idea, you're trying to climb some mountain, and, and it just, like, and then people remind you, like, that the beverage industry is very competitive, right? And it's like, uh-huh. And they're like, so what makes you think you can be successful? Like all these things just feed in to
Yeah.
your own doubts,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, so you can, whatever, fake it till you make it and tell everybody, but somewhere in there, there's this little voice saying, I don't know, like this is really hard.
Yeah.
And, and I think that the thing that really fueled me ultimately to keep going, though, was an interesting story. About a year into this, I really, the doubts and the doubters, there were plenty of them, and it was just kind of fueling my own like fears, really, of whether or not I could actually go do something. I really did believe that I could always go back to tech, and if nothing else, it'd be a great story, like, oh, I launched a beverage. It was I wasn't afraid to sort of own that I like failed. I was like, it'd be kind of funny,
Yeah.
I'll be a good dinner conversation, whatever. um and I hadn't taken investors. I was using my own
Mm-hmm.
money initially to try and figure this stuff out, because I didn't know how to get a distributor. Like I saw Coke and Pepsi trucks going down the road over the years, but I didn't know how to like call them, and like why would they want to ultimately distribute my product too? Like, they didn't have an ownership in the company. All of these things were like just foreign to me. And so a year in, I was sharing this like with a friend of mine. I just said, I don't know, I should like just not do this anymore. I should like move on because I'm getting traction and I have consumers that really like the product, but I just don't know. She's like, oh, I met this guy at Coca-Cola, and he's like super senior. Like, let me reach out to him and see if he'd talk to you. Cause I don't know, like you're trying to figure out distribution, you're trying to figure out how to get like the proper shelf life. So I get a phone call with this guy, and I'm on the phone with them, and like first 15 minutes I'm sharing like, yeah, we're doing pretty well, we've gotten in all these stores, like 10 stores in the Bay Area, and it's doing pretty well, and it's just hard, and it's just like me loading up my Grand Cherokee and delivering it, whatever. And he interrupts me and says, sweetie, Americans love sweet, this isn't going anywhere. And I was like, whoa, like what just happened? I mean, and I was like, wait a minute, like he just called me sweetie over the phone, and now I'm like, and again, I was just like, huh, okay. Like, and I said, wait, I'm sorry, what did you say? And he said, look, I've been doing this for a long time, blah, 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 blah. And he went on and on. And it was interesting because what I realized is that he was, this industry expert in my mind. Like, I thought somewhere in there that he could like wave his wand and say, like, here's how you get
Yeah.
successful. Here's
The one,
distribution.
two,
Here's this.
threes, right? He was going to give you a one, two,
Right.
three. Yeah.
Right. And instead, like I listened very carefully because he had said something that was so shocking to me, right? Like he had said, "Sweetie," right? And I thought, "Oh, like whoa, like that, what's he saying?" And it was so shocking that it kind of woke me up to really listen. And after 1 hour of kind of hearing, basically what their strategy was around selling people, he kept saying, people want sweet, they just want lower calories, they'll buy more if we continue to sweeten it. We've got to get calories down to like 0. They were like at 10 calories at the time. And so like I hung up the phone with him, and I thought, okay, I have a choice. I either go and start this company or I don't. But if I don't do it, he's never going to do it because he does not care about health. Like people weren't talking about mission-based companies back then,
Right.
but like I kept saying like, my purpose of starting this company is to help people get off of like the the junk,
Yeah.
right? And we can get them to water. And it was all about health. And it was because I had seen what it had done to help me and could I help other people. That was just not even in his vocabulary. He was on this different river. And so I thought if I like I'll just throw the gas on now and just go try. Like and that's when I started thinking back on all these things that were really challenging to me that I had actually overcome. I mean, people have said to me for years, like, forget about what happened before. And I've always been like, I don't know, you can like learn a lot
Yeah.
from, you can like gain energy and gain confidence. And times when I thought about um, you know, like getting it into Whole Foods. I didn't know if I was going to get it into Whole Foods. I didn't know like a lot of things, but I tried.
Mhm.
And so that's what I talk about constantly is that, don't have like these big lofty goals. Maybe you have like this huge goal, but instead just have these little things that you can actually like look back on and say, like, those were hard, but I achieved those things. And so that is like the key thing that I just kept looking at.
So, Kara, you said something that I think everyone should really hear. You talked about you can have the big dreams, you can have the big goals, but you almost got to live in the moment, right? So, a thing I
Totally.
always say is there's no elevator in life. There's not. You have to take the
Mhm.
steps, and even though you can see the top deck, like, hey, that's where I want to be, right? I want to change. I want to do this. You've got to just you got to have little wins. You got to have little wins here and there, little
Totally.
steps, and I think as talking to him, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. I almost would smell blood in the water. The reason he's talking to you and he's totally downplaying you and calling you sweetie is, and this is my opinion, it's like, hey, there's a little bit of you'll never make it, maybe animosity, maybe fear, maybe I don't know. Did you
Yeah.
kind of sense that there's blood in the water of like if he shuts this down, it's never a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, take a chess piece off the table
Yeah,
quickly, like get her out of here. Maybe, but you know what? At the end of the day, I'll never know. Like I've talked about this a lot when I've been out
yeah,
speaking. Like, there's things that will happen to you in your
yep,
journey that are, like obnoxious, right? Like challenging, right? Like, and as my dad used to always say to me, like, you got to consider the source. When people say stuff that is just bizarre, right? Like it's like you have a choice. You get affected by it or you just move on.
amen.
And so right? And it's just and that's life. And I think that that is what the best entrepreneurs are capable of doing, right? It's not that it doesn't affect them or they don't remember it or they don't hurt, in some way,
Yeah,
but it's like they just have a choice and along the way. And I mean, and now it's like for me it's like a war chest, right? Like it's like where I can sit there and look at it and I'm like, let me tell you this one, right?
right.
Like and I can like go back and I can laugh at it because again, like whenever you have challenges, and I really believe this in like your personal life as well as your business life, I think they all total up, right? It just makes you stronger, right? It makes you more like, resilient. It makes you, able to like face
Hmm.
fears and conquer failures. And as long as you can own them and learn from them and just say, yeah, it didn't work out so well. I mean, another story I talk about, I'd always heard like, never get into a store and get kicked out, right? And now, I mean, I can tell you like we've been kicked out of multiple stores for different reasons. Like we've been kicked out of Target,
Yeah.
we've been like we were kicked out of
Oh
Starbucks,
wow.
like, we've like I mean, we've been like but at the end of the day, like what I now share with people is like when you have those down days as an entrepreneur, like it's not that they don't hurt. It's that I know that like there's going to be a good day coming.
Yep.
And the best you can hope for is that it comes sooner rather than later, but you have to like be listening and you have to like have your eyes wide open for it, right? And I'm sure you've experienced,
Hmm.
this as well. And I think that, that's what like I always talk about, now I look back and, it's always easier to look in the rear view mirror on this stuff, but our direct to consumer business ultimately it's like 55% of our overall business. And clearly during the pandemic when so many people were dealing with stores shut down or out of stock situations or whatever, and having that relationship with the consumer was just like imperative. That actually happened when we started our own direct to consumer business after we were in Amazon for a year and we weren't getting the data or the emails about our customers. And the buyer from from Amazon had reached out to us because he used to buy Blackberry Hint at Starbucks.
Hmm.
And so we had just been kicked out of Starbucks. And I get this phone call from him. I've got like 6 months of inventory that I'm about to destroy in the warehouse because it's got a shelf life. And I'm like, you know, I'm so angry with Starbucks. But the Amazon buyer says, "Hey, I love your product. I buy it at Starbucks all the time." And I'm like, "Should I tell him that we got kicked out?" I'm like, "Oh, great. Well, I have a bunch in of inventory in the warehouse if you're interested in buying it." And so now I look at these like, all those dots
Yeah.
connect. It's like a triangle,
Yeah.
right? And so I say to people, you know, all the time, it's like the world, it really does connect. and
There's a
and
reason
you've
for
got
things happening. Every bad
totally,
thing usually leads to an opportunity or something learned from it that's going to make you better. I always say we have a
totally,
100% survival rate, or we wouldn't be listening and watching this on all the bad stuff we've been through, whether it's personal, whether it's business.
totally.
If we're still here, then we've overcame it, and it has done something to us. It's made us bigger, better, stronger, more immune to it, right? And that's the thing. And I think that's wonderful to hear one opportunity bother your business and you're like, oh, this is so wasteful, and you're aggravated. That opens another door to where you're, selling on Amazon now, right? So
Totally. And then ultimately we still sell on Amazon, but we sell on our own at drinkhint.com. And again, like I didn't know a pandemic was coming, but like we were already set up. No beverage companies were set up to do what we were doing. We were like all day long, we were just shipping product because we didn't have any, issues with like electronic data transmission not making it into
yeah,
stores. Like we were like direct. And so, our businesses has tripled this year because we were just like boom,
that's it.
like
You
we just
saw an issue and there was an opportunity there, and you benefited the people out there. Our business did the same thing. It tripled. People are like, hey, we
yeah,
need to have power. We need to have solar. That's the mindset of a real entrepreneur that's on a mission for why, right? It wasn't about greed. It was about you have something that is
totally.
changing the world. We have something that's saving the planet, giving people empower them to own their power. When you have that why, when you have that reason you were talking about, it makes everything so much sweeter as you continue to grow. And I believe things align the way the universe is great. It's tough, but it's great. Like you said, it turns into that triangle and aligns the way it's supposed to go. Good things happen to good people. I believe that.
I totally do too. And it's yeah, so that is a lot of what I talk about in this book. And I think, you'll probably agree as well that, people I think that are not entrepreneurs or maybe new entrepreneurs that are almost too close to it view it as like the unicorns or the failures,
Yeah.
right? And I always feel like the stuff in between is the stuff that you need to hear about. You need to hear about your stories, my stories, in order to know that it's going to be okay. Like there's challenges
And
along the
we've heard
way. There,
stories that have helped us
yeah,
along the way that people realize they're like,
totally,
oh, they just exploded in hints all over the world now. No, there was a grind, there was failure, there was
totally.
struggles, there was heartaches, there were tears, there were confusion. Do I quit? Do I not? You expressed all that. I want to talk a little bit about I know we're both cutting into time here. One more thing I want to ask about the book, but I also want to ask about you guys got into sunscreen.
Yeah,
Now, that
yeah.
is the sunscreen that smells delicious.
It is so good. Have you tried it?
Yes, we took it to Turks
Yeah.
recently, and my wife sprayed. I'm like, "What is that? That
What
smells
is that?
amazing." She's like, "It's their new
Yeah,
sunscreen." I was like, "We bought boxes full. We love it,
yeah.
by the way. It's so
It's
good."
so good. Yeah, it's real quick. I mean, it's a funny story. I mean, funny and not so funny. I had basal cell skin cancer on my nose,
Oof.
and which is like, the best kind. If you get skin cancer, it's like the best kind. So I get it removed. I'm like, should I like? I guess I don't wear sunscreen because I wear foundation. It has SPF in it. My dermatologist is like, like you gotta like get religion around like wearing sunscreen. So I'm looking for the right sunscreen. A lot of them are like the better ones are like pasty. And I'm like, I don't like that. And then I start looking at ingredients, doing research. I didn't want this chemical called oxybenzone in my sunscreens because it was approved by the FDA in the 70s, even though it's not approved anywhere else in the world. And it potentially, according to the CDC, could actually cause precancer cells to grow. And I was like, growing up in Arizona,
Yeah.
like did all kinds of damage to my skin, whatever. So I order a bunch of ingredients, like making my own sunscreen, not even thinking that it was going to be the Hint sunscreen, but it was really good. And friends were like, "Oh my God, it's clear. It's great." So one day I started using the grapefruit extract that I had for the water, and I threw it in, and somebody said like, "Oh, you got to get FDA approval on this." And I was like, "This isn't like a Hint thing. I'm just like making it for myself." And then I was like, I don't know, be kind of fun just to like go and see if I can get FDA approval. So I like throw it into the FDA to see if I could get it. It took a year. And then we launch it, get this, in January, 2 years ago, we launch it and on our direct to consumer site, and didn't even try for stores. We don't, whatever. And it was like 60% of our list went and bought this bottle of sunscreen. That's when I knew that I had a brand.
Yeah.
Like people, we didn't like go to the beach and start spraying it on people. They were like, "Oh, that's kind of crazy." Like your wife, like saying, "Oh my God, they have a sunscreen now." And so that's like, I mean, it's crazy. That's how it started. And then what was the most interesting thing about it, which I didn't expect, was that 2 months later, a bunch of these sunscreens that I had been looking at, I start getting notes from consumers saying, "Did you know that these like major sunscreens are putting no oxybenzone on the front of
Look
the
at you making an
bottles?"
impact.
Right? And so I thought, wow, like I really care about my consumers, but if I can just like go in and recreate and get these guys to reformulate and that I in areas where I think they're doing, the wrong
Yeah.
thing, then that's pretty great. It's not like I need to go deep in these. I can just like go in there and really represent what I was here to do in the first place, which is help this
You're the
consumer get healthy.
trendsetter. Yeah. I mean, that you're setting the
Yeah.
trend. That's amazing. I love
And
the
so that
smell of them.
happened.
How do you get them to smell so amazing? They don't smell like normal sunscreen.
Yeah, well, it's the extracts, and
So
so
good.
we're using real fruit. And actually, during the pandemic, I did not like hand sanitizers. So these are we'll definitely send you some,
Oh
but this is
yeah.
Clementine, the hand sanitizers, because I was like, a lot of it like just
They smell
smelled
horrible,
either
don't they? It's like, oh
horrible,
yeah.
right? And then it ends up a bunch of them were recalled. They
Ugh.
were coming from Mexico or something. It was like craziness. And so I'm like, yuck, we don't want that. So we started making hand sanitizer during the pandemic. And I mean, it's going crazy right now. And like, again, like it's just for me as an entrepreneur too, I'm sure you can appreciate this. Like I love the creative side of
Yeah.
it and the like build side. And so, it allows me to kind of my passion project of sort of getting my hand into, calling like new
Yeah.
co-packers and like trying to figure out exactly how this stuff works. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun doing it.
It's
And,
exciting.
at the end of the day, yeah, it's pretty fun. So
I'm going to hold you to
yeah,
that for the sanitizer, by the way. So, last question:
yeah.
where can everyone buy your book? Let's talk about the book one more time. Also, where can they buy direct? Because I'm going to make sure that I give that to the wife so we don't buy it on Amazon. Nothing against Amazon, but we'd rather buy direct if we get a chance.
Yeah, just
Yep.
drinkhint.com, and you can buy the book on there too, but also on Amazon as well. And yeah, and definitely I'm all over social at Kara Goldin with an I. If you guys want to reach out as well, I'd love to
What's
have
your
you guys.
podcast? Where does everyone hit you up on your
Yeah,
podcast?
so the podcast is called The Kara Goldin Show, and we should have you on there talking about your business.
I'll
I would
take you
love
up on
it.
that anytime. I'm open. I
Yeah.
love getting on there and sharing my story as well. But listen, Kara, I appreciate you getting on here and not only just being a female. We talked about this earlier. I got 3 daughters that inspire to do great things in this world. My wife, now that
Oh,
our kids are more grown, my youngest is 10, my oldest is 22. She's getting ready to get into a business like a lash lounge type thing. She's excited about her next chapter, and I love to see female entrepreneurs that overcome things and grab things by the
I love it.
horns and do it. I love that. So that's exciting. Kudos to you for that. And kudos on the EY Entrepreneur of the Year. I love when I get to talk to someone else that's won that as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for being
Yay.
on the show. Everybody, check out Hint Water and definitely go to trueunderdog.com, and you can get the sanitizer, you can get the sunscreen, you can get the water, which is amazing. And you can find the book and the podcast, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Kara. I appreciate it.
Yep.
That's a wrap here on
Thank
True Underdog. Bam! That concludes another episode here on True Underdog. If you're interested in hearing more, make sure you subscribe at iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the YouTube channel. You can always visit trueunderdog.com, subscribe to all of them. Make sure you check out our newest episodes coming out on Mondays and Thursdays. True Underdog, baby. Bam!